The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training grounds at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The base sprawled across thousands of acres, a place where ordinary people came to become extraordinary. Or at least, that's what they hoped. The mess hall was filling up with hungry soldiers, the sound of trays clattering and voices echoing off the metal walls. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She was 28 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a tight regulation bun and eyes that had seen things most people only read about in history books. She wore her dress uniform with the same precision she brought to everything else in her life. But when she walked into the mess hall that day, nobody knew who she really was. And that would become the whole problem. Sarah had been stationed at Fort Bragg for exactly 4 days. She'd transferred from a classified assignment and was supposed to be keeping a low profile while she figured out her next move. Her commander had been clear about that. Keep your head down. Don't draw attention. Let things settle. It was good advice, and Sarah had always been good at following orders. She grabbed a tray and made her way through the line. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans. Simple food, exactly what she needed. She was looking for a quiet corner where she could eat in peace and maybe read the letter her mother had sent. Her mom had written about the family business, the hardware store back in their small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Sarah loved those letters. They grounded her. They reminded her of who she'd been before everything changed. She found a table near the window, away from most of the noise. She should have known it wouldn't last long. For recruits approached her table. They were young men, probably late teens or very early 20s, all still in that stage of training where they felt the need to prove something every single day. Their leader was a tall kid named Derek, with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been told no. His friends, Matt, Chris, and Tyler, trailed behind him like they always did. "Hey," Derek said, not as a greeting but as a statement of intention. "This table's taken." Sarah looked up from her meatloaf. She could see exactly what was about to happen. She'd seen it 100 times before. It was almost like watching a play unfold where she'd already memorized all the lines. Young men with something to prove. A woman alone. The perfect storm of stupidity and weakness looking for a victim. "There's plenty of open seats," she said calmly, turning her attention back to her food. "Yeah, but we want this one," Matt said, and the other two laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Sarah took a bite of her potatoes. She didn't rush. She didn't react. She was trained to assess threats, and these 4 weren't threats. They were just loud, dumb, and looking for attention. But they also represented something that had frustrated her for her entire military career. "Look," Derek said, leaning down and placing his hands on the table. His body language was aggressive, designed to intimidate. His friends spread out, surrounding the table, making sure she couldn't leave without squeezing past them. "We're telling you nicely. Move." Sarah set down her fork. Very carefully. Very deliberately. She turned to face Derek, and for the first time, he got a good look at her eyes. Most people couldn't read eyes. They didn't know what to look for. But Derek, despite all his bravado, suddenly felt something shift. There was no fear in those eyes. There was no anger. There was nothing at all, just an absolute, unshakable calm. "Recruit," she said quietly, "you need to walk away. Right now. This is not a situation you want to be part of." "Oh, we're intimidated," Chris said sarcastically. "Look at her trying to." That's when Sarah stood up. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't sudden. She simply rose from her chair with the kind of controlled grace that came from years of discipline. She was 5'8", and while she was fit, she wasn't particularly intimidating in appearance. She looked like anyone's sister or friend. That was part of what made what happened next so shocking. "I'm going to give you 4 seconds to leave," she said, her voice completely level. "And I'm going to do this because I'm asking you nicely. I don't want trouble. I didn't come here looking for it. 1. Derek's friends exchanged glances. Something in her tone had changed. It was like they'd just realized they were staring at a different person than the one they'd been talking to moments before. 2. Sarah continued. Come on, Derek said to his friends, but he was looking at her, not them. He was reading her the same way she'd read him. And he was starting to understand that he'd made a mistake. 3. They moved. Not quickly. Not in a panic. But they moved. And they left. By the time Sarah said 4, they were already heading toward the other side of the mess hall. The rest of the soldiers in the mess hall had watched the whole thing. Some had phones out, recording. By evening, a video of the encounter would be circulating through the base. A woman, completely calm, backing down 4 recruits without lifting a finger. By the next morning, people would be talking about the new girl. They just wouldn't know her name yet. Sarah sat back down. She picked up her fork. She finished her meatloaf. But inside, she felt that familiar weight settling in her chest. This was why she'd asked for the transfer. This was why she'd wanted to disappear for a while. Because no matter where she went, no matter how hard she tried to just be normal, something always came up that made people curious. Made them wonder. Made them ask questions. By the end of the week, she knew, everyone at Fort Bragg would know her face. They'd be asking who she was. They'd be searching for her name in the news, in military databases, in all the classified places where military personnel stories were whispered about. And when they found out the truth, everything would change. By Friday morning, Sarah Mitchell had become a legend. The video from the mess hall had been uploaded and reposted across dozens of military forums and social media groups. The comments section was a mess of speculation. People were asking who she was, where she came from, what her rank was. Some thought she was a martial arts instructor. Others claimed she was a military psychologist. A few, the ones who knew how to read between the lines, wondered if she might be something else entirely. She tried to ignore it. She stuck to her schedule. Training in the mornings. Paperwork in the afternoons. Quiet dinners in her small apartment just off the base. She called her mother on Wednesday night and didn't mention any of it. How could she? Her mother still thought of her as the girl who'd worked in the family hardware store, who'd volunteered at the local library, who'd been voted most helpful in her high school yearbook. That girl didn't exist anymore. That Sarah had volunteered for the Navy SEALs when she was 21 years old, driven by something she still didn't fully understand. A need to push herself. A desire to prove that women could do what men could do. A belief that if she was brave enough, strong enough, tough enough, maybe she could make a difference in the world. She had made it through BUD/S training, the basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, in 2014. She'd been one of the first women to complete the full course. The pain had been unimaginable. The hunger, the cold, the exhaustion. Hypothermia, dehydration, the constant feeling that her body was going to fail her. But it hadn't. She'd pushed through Hell Week, that brutal, soul-crushing 7-day gauntlet where most people quit. She'd become a Navy SEAL. And then she'd spent the last 7 years in the shadows. That's what people didn't understand about being a SEAL. The movies made it look glamorous. They showed the action, the heroics, the moment when you saved the day and got the girl. Real life was different. Real life was careful planning, perfect execution, and knowing when not to talk about what you'd done. Real life was classified assignments and debriefings that went nowhere. Real life was coming home alone because you couldn't tell anyone where you'd been or what you'd done. Real life was lonely. Sarah had requested the transfer to Fort Bragg because she was burned out. She'd told her commanding officer that she needed some time to figure out if she wanted to continue with the program. She'd asked for a temporary reassignment where she could do basic training work while she recovered mentally. She'd asked, in other words, to disappear for a while. And it had been working. For 4 days, it had been working perfectly. Then Derek and his friends decided to make a scene, and Sarah's carefully constructed quiet life exploded. By Monday, Major Thomas Kellerman called her into his office. He was a big man, probably mid-50s, with the kind of posture that came from decades of discipline. He'd been at Fort Bragg for 15 years, and he ran his section like a well-oiled machine. "Sit down, Mitchell," he said, not looking up from his computer. Sarah sat. She kept her posture perfect, her hands on her lap, her expression neutral. "I've been getting calls," Kellerman continued, finally turning to look at her. "Lots of calls. From people asking questions about you. Asking what your assignment is here. Asking whether you're really who your records say you are." He leaned back in his chair. "You want to tell me what that video was about?" "For recruits tried to force me from a table in the mess hall," Sarah said simply. "I asked them to leave. They left. That was the entire interaction." Kellerman nodded slowly. "And the way you made them leave? That was just good persuasion skills." "I'm a woman alone," Sarah said. "I'm smaller than they were. I wasn't going to win a physical fight. So I didn't have one." Kellerman said. He wasn't stupid. He was reading between the lines, same as everyone else. "You know what I think, Mitchell? I think you're something special. Something that people are very interested in learning more about. And I think that's becoming a problem for both of us." Sarah didn't respond. She waited. "Derek Brooks came to me on Saturday," Kellerman said. "He's one of those recruits from the video. He's young and dumb, and he was embarrassed. He wanted to know who you were. Where you were from. What made you so confident. He's been doing some digging." "Has he?" Sarah said. "He's a smart kid, despite the fact that he makes stupid decisions," Kellerman continued. "He found your service record." "Well, parts of it. The classified parts are sealed, obviously. But he found enough to know that you're not just some training officer helping with basic recruits. He knows you're SEAL qualified. He's figured out there's something in your background that's being kept quiet." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She didn't let her face change, but inside, she could feel the walls she'd carefully built starting to crack. "The problem," Kellerman said, "is that Derek talks. Derek told his friends. His friends told other people. And now the entire base is curious about you. And when the base is curious about someone, command gets curious too. And when command gets curious, people start making phone calls." He stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the training grounds. "I got a call this morning from a general," he said quietly. "He asked about you. Wanted to know if you were causing problems. I told him no, you were quiet, professional, easy to work with. He told me that was good. He told me to make sure you stayed that way. He told me that there were people who would very much like to know more about you than they currently do. And that it would be better for everyone if that curiosity didn't get satisfied." He turned back to face her. "Do you understand what I'm telling you, Mitchell?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "There are some people who don't want my background publicized." "More than some," Kellerman said. "Now, I don't know exactly what you did. I don't want to know. But I know it was important enough that it's being kept under wraps by people who have a lot of power. And if that information got out, it could cause problems for them. So, they want you quiet. They want you invisible. They want you to do your job and not draw attention." He came back and sat on the front of his desk, so he was looking down at her slightly. "The thing is," he said, "Derek Brooks is a loose cannon right now. He's embarrassed. He's angry. He's looking for a way to make sense of what happened to him. And he's starting to dig into places where he shouldn't be digging. Which means either you're going to have to deal with him, or someone else is going to." Sarah understood exactly what he was saying. Kellerman was giving her options. She could handle the Derek Brooks problem herself. She could intimidate him into letting it go. She could probably do it in a way that wouldn't leave any marks, any evidence, anything that would trace back to her. Or she could let the higher-ups handle it. And they would. They'd do it quietly, efficiently, and with the kind of ruthlessness that came with power and secrecy. "I'll talk to him," Sarah said. "Good," Kellerman said, and he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "That's what I thought you'd say. You seem like the type who cleans up your own messes." Sarah left his office with her head high and her heart pounding. She'd made a terrible mistake. By standing up to Derek in the mess hall, by showing even a hint of her training, she'd opened a door that she couldn't close. She'd become visible. And in her line of work, visibility was the most dangerous thing of all. She had to find Derek Brooks. She had to make him understand that some doors shouldn't be opened. She had to convince him, without crossing a line that she wasn't sure she could come back from, that his curiosity was going to get him hurt. As she walked across the base in the fading afternoon light, Sarah didn't notice the young soldier who'd been watching her from across Kellerman's office. She didn't notice the phone call that soldier made about 20 minutes later. She didn't notice the fact that someone other than Derek Brooks had also been asking questions about her. Someone who had every reason to want the truth to come out. Derek Brooks wasn't hard to find. He was a creature of habit, and Sarah had learned years ago that habit was the thing that killed most people. At 1800 hours, he was always at the gym. He was trying to prove something to himself after the mess hall incident, running too hard, lifting too heavy, burning himself out in an attempt to regain some of the confidence that she'd stripped away from him so effortlessly. She waited for him outside the gym, in the parking lot, leaning against her truck. She'd changed into civilian clothes, jeans and a jacket. No uniform. No rank insignia. Just a woman waiting for a recruit. When Derek saw her, he stopped walking. His hand went to his phone, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might call for help. "Don't," she said simply. "Just hear me out." He walked toward her slowly, his body tense. He was afraid. She could read it in his shoulders, in the way he held his breath. "I need you to stop asking questions about me," Sarah said. "I need you to delete any files you've downloaded. I need you to tell your friends to stop talking about what happened in the mess hall. And I need you to understand that some people don't like being talked about." "Who are you?" Derek asked, and there was something in his voice besides fear. There was anger. There was hurt. "It doesn't matter," Sarah said. "It does to me," Derek said, and his voice got louder. "Because I looked you up. I saw the training records. I saw enough to know that you're not some normal training officer. You're something else. Something secret. And I want to know what." Sarah realized her mistake before Derek finished the sentence. She'd been trained to assess threats and neutralize them. But she hadn't been trained to actually explain herself. She hadn't been trained to justify her existence to people like Derek. Nobody had ever asked her to before. Nobody had ever had the combination of stubbornness and shame that Derek had. "My story isn't your story to know," Sarah said. "Why not?" Derek demanded. "Because I'm not important enough? Because I'm just a recruit and you're some elite operator or whatever? You came at me in that mess hall. You made me look like an idiot in front of 300 soldiers. You think you can just disappear after that?" "Yes," Sarah said. "That's exactly what I think I can do." "Well, you're wrong," Derek said. He pulled out his phone. "Because I'm going to put this together, and I'm going to post it online, and I'm going to keep posting until someone tells me the truth. I don't care if you're a SEAL or a secret agent or whatever. You don't get to humiliate me and then just walk away." He was right. She realized at the moment he said it. He was right, and she'd been wrong. She'd known that going into the mess hall that day. She'd known that showing her training, even in the smallest way, would create questions. She'd done it anyway. Because part of her, some deep, buried part of her, was tired of being invisible. If you do that, Sarah said quietly, people are going to come looking for you. Not me. Not the military. Other people. People who have resources and patience and no actual limits on what they're willing to do. Derek's phone shook in his hand. She could see him processing what she'd said. She could see him understanding, for the first time, that he'd stumbled onto something actually dangerous. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, and there were tears in his eyes. I didn't mean to, I was just trying to. I know, Sarah said, and her voice was gentle because she could afford to be gentle now. She'd made her point. You were trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. That's natural. But you need to stop. You need to let it go. I can't, Derek said. Everyone's talking about you. The story is already out there. Even if I don't do anything, other people will. He was right about that too. Sarah had known it when she was in Kellerman's office. She'd known it as she watched the video spread across the internet. The truth was already escaping. All she could do now was try to contain it. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it, and her blood went cold. The message contained a picture. It was a screenshot from a video recording. It showed Sarah, several years earlier, in full tactical gear, exiting a helicopter in what looked like the mountains of Afghanistan. Underneath the image, a single line of text, "We need to talk." She looked up from her phone and saw a car pulling into the parking lot. It was nondescript. Gray sedan. The kind of car that nobody ever noticed. The kind of car that government agencies used when they wanted to move around without attracting attention. A man got out. He was probably in his mid-50s, with gray hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from spending decades in difficult work. He was wearing a suit, which immediately marked him as something other than military. Sarah Mitchell, he called out. I'm Special Agent Robert Hartley, FBI. I need to speak with you. Alone. Derek took a step back. Go, Sarah told him. Leave. And don't talk to anyone about what happened here. Not today. Not ever. Derek didn't need to be told twice. He practically ran away, leaving Sarah alone in the parking lot with the FBI agent. Hartley walked up to her slowly, his hands visible, showing that he wasn't a threat. At least not in the immediate physical sense. We had an agreement, he said simply. You stay quiet about your mission to Azerbaijan. You keep your head down, you don't talk to the media, you don't make any public statements about what you did there. And we leave you alone to live your life. Sarah's stomach dropped. Azerbaijan. That was a mission that was supposed to be completely black. No one was supposed to know about it. She certainly wasn't supposed to be connected to it publicly. How do you have that photo? She asked. Someone leaked it, Hartley said. Not from our side. Not from the military. Someone from the other side. Someone who was in that helicopter with you. Someone who has every reason to want you exposed and destroyed. Who? Sarah asked, but she was already thinking through possibilities. She was already running through faces and names of people she'd worked with. That's what we need to talk about, Hartley said. Because there's a reporter in New York City right now who's about to publish a story about an illegal black ops mission conducted on foreign soil without congressional authorization. And you're the centerpiece of that story. Your name, your face, your history, all of it. It's coming out, Sarah. And we need to figure out how to control the damage. Sarah stood there, her truck at her back, the FBI agent in front of her, and the entire life she tried to leave behind suddenly slamming back into focus. When? She asked. 48 hours, Hartley said. Maybe less. The reporter is being cagey about exactly when they're going to publish, but our intelligence suggests it's soon. Very soon. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Because, Hartley said, you're going to have to decide whether you want to tell your side of the story or let someone else tell it for you. And you need to do that before this hits the media, not after. He pulled out a card and handed it to her. Call me when you're ready to talk, he said. But don't take too long. The clock is already moving. He walked back to his car, got in, and drove away. Sarah stood alone in the parking lot as the sun finished setting, as darkness fell over Fort Bragg, and as her world moved from controlled chaos into something much, much worse. She looked down at the card in her hand. FBI. Special Agent Robert Hartley. Below that, a phone number and an email address. She thought about her mother back in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. She thought about the hardware store. She thought about the innocent, normal life that was about to be torn apart. And she thought about the person who'd leaked that photo. The person who'd been waiting for her to surface so they could destroy her. The person who was, in that very moment, probably watching to see what she would do next. The reporter's name was Catherine Voss, and she worked for a national news outlet that specialized in investigative reporting about classified government operations. She'd won awards for her work exposing security breaches and bureaucratic corruption. She had access, sources, and the kind of relentless determination that made her dangerous to powerful people. But first, Sarah needed to find out who had given her the information. She didn't call Hartley. Not yet. Instead, she went back to her small apartment and pulled up everything she could about the Azerbaijan mission. It had happened 4 years ago. It was officially classified, but Hartley's confirmation that it was being exposed meant that the secrecy was already compromised. Sarah spent the next 8 hours going through every name, every contact, every person who'd been involved. There were 43 operatives total. 43 people who knew what she'd been doing in those mountains. The mission itself was simple enough: stop a terrorist cell that was trying to move weapons across borders into the Middle East. They'd succeeded. They'd stopped the operation cold. 32 confirmed kills. 7 operatives injured. No deaths. It was considered one of the most successful Black Ops missions in a decade. But there was a problem. The mission had caused collateral damage. Civilian casualties. 8 people who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. 8 people who died because the intelligence had been incomplete. 8 people who Sarah had helped kill, even though they weren't the targets. Sarah hadn't been involved in the decision-making that led to that collateral damage. She'd been following orders. She'd done her job. But she'd also seen those 8 bodies. She'd seen their faces. She'd memorized them because that's what you did when you made a mistake like that. You remembered. By the time she'd finished cross-referencing names with the mission details, she had a short list. People who'd had access to classified photos. People who'd been in a country where a reporter might have found them. People who had reasons to be angry about the collateral damage. The name that kept coming up was Marcus Blackwood. Marcus had been the intelligence officer on the mission. He'd been the one who'd provided the target locations. He'd been the one who'd briefed the team on what they could expect. And he'd been the one who'd known about the civilian presence in the buildings they'd targeted. He'd also been the one who'd recommended going in anyway. Sarah hadn't thought about Marcus Blackwood in 4 years. She'd tried to forget about everyone from that mission. But as she sat in her apartment and stared at his name on her laptop screen, she realized that forgetting wasn't an option anymore. It was 0200 hours when she made the decision. She left Fort Bragg in civilian clothes. She drove to the airport in Fayetteville. By 0800 hours, she was on a flight to New York City. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She didn't ask permission from Kellerman or Hartley. She was done playing by rules that had been designed to protect people who didn't deserve protection. Catherine Voss's office was in a building in Midtown Manhattan. Sarah had her home address, courtesy of some quick internet research, but she figured the office would be less likely to result in a visit from the police. Besides, she wanted an audience. She wanted Catherine to know exactly who was speaking to her. She walked in during the middle of the afternoon, bypassing the receptionist with the kind of confidence that made people assume she belonged there. She found Catherine's office on the 5th floor, and the reporter was at her desk, typing away, completely focused on her work. "Catherine Voss," Sarah said, knocking on the open door. Catherine looked up, and Sarah watched her go through a rapid series of reactions. Confusion, followed by recognition, followed by something that looked like fear. "You're her," Catherine said. "You're the woman in the photo. Where did you get that photo?" Sarah asked. Catherine's hand moved to her phone, probably to press some kind of panic button or call for security. Sarah moved into the office and closed the door. "I'm not going to hurt you," Sarah said. "I'm not here to intimidate you or stop you from publishing your story. I'm here because I need to know who gave you that photo. I need to know who's trying to destroy me and why." Catherine relaxed slightly, but her hand was still near her phone. "I have a source," Catherine said carefully. "A former intelligence operative who was involved in the Azerbaijan mission. He wanted the world to know what really happened." "His name," Sarah said. "I can't tell you that," Catherine said. "You know I can't. Protecting sources is the foundation of what I do." Sarah nodded. She'd expected that answer. "Then let me tell you what I think happened," Sarah said. She sat down in the chair across from Catherine's desk without being invited. 4 years ago, there was a classified military operation. It was successful in its primary objective, but it resulted in civilian casualties. 8 people died. The person responsible for the intelligence that led to those deaths was an officer named Marcus Blackwood. He knew there was a chance civilians were present. He recommended the operation anyway. And he's been living with the guilt ever since. Catherine didn't confirm or deny any of this, but her face told Sarah everything she needed to know. "So, he leaked the information," Sarah continued. "He leaked the photo, the mission details, my name, everything. Not because he's trying to stop me or expose the military. But because he's trying to expose himself. He's trying to force the government to acknowledge what happened. He's trying to create a scandal so big that they'll have to admit to what they did." "Is that wrong?" Catherine asked. "Don't the American people deserve to know what their government is doing in their name?" "Yes," Sarah said simply. "They do. But not like this. Not by destroying one person to hide another person's guilt. Not by using me as the weapon to expose something that Marcus Blackwood should have had the courage to expose himself." Catherine leaned back in her chair. She was studying Sarah, trying to assess her, trying to figure out what Sarah wanted. "What are you asking me to do?" Catherine asked. "I'm asking you to publish the story," Sarah said. "I'm asking you to do your job. But I'm also asking you to include Marcus Blackwood's name in that story. I'm asking you to explain that he was the one who leaked the information. I'm asking you to publish the names of the 8 civilians who died. And I'm asking you to explain why he did it." "That's a lot to ask," Catherine said. "I know," Sarah said. She stood up. "But it's the only way this becomes about something more than just scandal and revenge. It becomes about accountability. Real accountability." She turned to leave. "Wait," Catherine said. "Will you talk to me? On the record? Can I use your name in the story?" Sarah paused at the door. "Yes," she said. "I'll do an interview. I'll tell you everything you want to know about what happened. But I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to do it publicly. I'm going to do it in front of cameras and reporters, not in some backroom secret conversation. I'm going to tell the truth, and I'm going to let the chips fall where they may." She left the office and took the elevator back down to the street. She had no idea if Catherine would actually do what Sarah had asked. Reporters had their own agendas, their own reasons for publishing. But Sarah had planted a seed. And sometimes, that was all you could do. She found Marcus Blackwood 4 hours later. He was at his apartment in Brooklyn, sitting alone on his balcony, staring out at the city. He looked older than Sarah remembered. He looked broken. "Hello, Marcus," Sarah said, stepping out onto the balcony. Marcus turned, and for a moment, there was shock on his face. Then it melted into something that looked like resignation. "I wondered if you'd figure it out," he said. "I wondered how long it would take." 48 hours, Sarah said. "I had about 48 hours from when Hartley told me the story was coming out." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and he was crying now. "I've been sorry for 4 years. Every day. Those 8 people. They didn't deserve what happened to them." "No," Sarah said. "They didn't. But neither did I." "You were following orders," Marcus said. "You were doing your job. I made the decision that got them killed." "That's right," Sarah said. She sat down in the chair next to him. "You made the decision. And then you ran from it. You stayed quiet. You let the secret stay classified. And when it became too much, instead of stepping forward yourself, you tried to force me into the spotlight." Marcus didn't respond. He just kept crying, staring out at the city, at all those millions of people who had no idea what happened in classified buildings and secret missions. "I'm going to tell my story," Sarah said. "I'm going to tell the world what happened in Azerbaijan. And I'm going to tell them that it was your decision. I'm going to tell them that you knew the risks and you authorized the operation anyway." "I know," Marcus said. "I know that's coming. I welcome it. I deserve it." "You deserve accountability," Sarah said. "But you deserve the chance to give it to yourself. To step forward on your own. To explain why you made the decisions you made. If you don't do that, then my story becomes about blame, and your story disappears. But if you do it, if you go on camera and you tell the truth about what happened and why, then maybe something actually changes." She stood up. "The reporter's name is Catherine Voss. She's planning to publish the story in 2 days. You can contact her before then, or you can let her tell your story without your voice in it. That's your choice." The story broke on a Wednesday morning. It led every major news outlet in the country. "Secret military operation resulted in civilian deaths, government covered up," the headlines screamed. Below that were photos: Sarah in tactical gear, Marcus Blackwood in his military dress uniform, the faces of the 8 civilian victims. Catherine Voss had done the job right. She'd included Marcus's name and his confession. She'd published his statement explaining that he'd known there was a risk to civilians, that he'd made the decision to proceed anyway, and that he'd been carrying the weight of that decision for 4 years. She'd interviewed families of the victims. She'd obtained documents that showed the decision-making process. She'd done investigative journalism at its finest. And she'd made sure that Sarah Mitchell's side of the story was told with nuance and complexity. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Congress announced an investigation. The Pentagon said they would be reviewing their Black Ops protocols. Several members of the government expressed outrage that such an operation had happened without their knowledge or authorization. Marcus Blackwood was arrested. Not for the civilian deaths, those had been ruled as appropriate for classified military operations, but for leaking classified information. He'd cooperated fully with Catherine Voss, and he was now facing federal charges. Sarah didn't feel good about that. She didn't feel like she'd won or achieved some kind of justice. But she did feel like something had shifted. The weight she'd been carrying, the burden of silence, had been lifted. On the morning that the story published, Sarah called her mother. It was early, and her mother was still in her bathrobe, puttering around the kitchen of the hardware store in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. "Mom," Sarah said, "I need to tell you something. You're probably going to hear it on the news today, and I want to hear it from me first." Her mother listened while Sarah explained the mission, the civilian casualties, the classified operation, the leaked photo. Her mother didn't interrupt. She just listened while her daughter, the one she'd always thought of as brave and good, explained the complicated reality of being a Navy SEAL. When Sarah finished, there was a long silence. "Are you okay?" her mother asked finally. "I'm getting there," Sarah said. "Do you have a lawyer?" her mother asked, because she was practical, because she'd raised a daughter who understood that some things required more than good intentions. "Yes," Sarah said. "The Navy provided one." "And you're not going to jail?" her mother asked. "No," Sarah said. "I was following orders. I was doing my job. That's actually what the law says protects me in situations like this." "Then come home," her mother said. "Come home to Millbrook. Take some time. The hardware store could use someone with your capabilities." Sarah smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd had in weeks. "I might do that, Mom," she said. "I just might." The congressional investigation went on for 6 months. It determined that the Azerbaijan mission had been authorized at the highest levels of government, that the civilian casualties had been considered an acceptable risk, and that the cover-up had been systematic and deliberate. Several government officials resigned. Several others were investigated. But in many ways, the investigation was secondary to what happened in the court of public opinion. America had a new Navy SEAL to think about. A woman who'd accomplished what only a handful of women had ever accomplished. A woman who'd been treated unfairly and who'd stood up for herself. A woman who'd exposed corruption and refused to be silenced. Suddenly, Sarah Mitchell was famous. News outlets wanted interviews. She was invited to speak at military academies and women's conferences. She received job offers from private security companies and government agencies. Some people saw her as a hero. Some saw her as a whistleblower. Some saw her as a traitor who'd exposed secrets. Sarah didn't care what people saw. What mattered was that she could walk down the street with her head up. What mattered was that her mother could go to the hardware store and talk about her daughter without shame. What mattered was that the 8 civilians who died in Azerbaijan were remembered by name. What mattered was that the truth was out there. 6 months after the story broke, Sarah found herself on a civilian street in Washington, D.C., heading to a congressional hearing about government oversight of classified operations. She was wearing her Navy dress uniform, the one she'd worn on her graduation from BUD/S training, the one that she'd worn to bury friends and to celebrate victories. As she walked into the building, she thought about Derek Brooks. He'd graduated from basic training. He'd sent her a message saying that he was proud of her, that he understood now why she tried to protect her identity. He was working with the military on new protocols for training and diversity. He was doing good work. She thought about Marcus Blackwood. He was serving a 5-year sentence for espionage charges. He'd maintained that he'd done the right thing by exposing the civilian deaths. Sarah couldn't be sure if she agreed with him or not. It was complicated. It would always be complicated. She thought about Major Kellerman, who'd warned her that the truth was coming. She wondered if he'd known more than he'd let on. She suspected he probably had. As she took her seat at the congressional hearing, as the cameras flashed and the reporters scrambled for position, as the gravity of the moment settled over the room, Sarah Mitchell felt something that she hadn't felt in years. She felt at peace. Not because everything was resolved. Not because justice had been served perfectly. Not because the world had suddenly become fair and good and right. But because she'd told the truth. Because she'd refused to be erased. Because she'd stood up in the mess hall when 4 recruits tried to knock her down, and she'd stood up in front of Congress when the government tried to keep her quiet. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer ashamed of what she'd done, even the parts that were terrible and complicated. She was Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL, the woman who'd cornered 4 recruits in a mess hall and won without throwing a single punch. But more importantly, she was Sarah Mitchell, a person who decided that some truths were worth telling, no matter the cost. And as the hearing began, as she raised her hand to be sworn in, as she prepared to answer questions about classified operations and government accountability and the price of doing the right thing, Sarah Mitchell smiled.